Quotations from myself, segment 50, quotation number 613. It is not what is given, but what is received that counts. For as some plants can extract enough nourishment to bloom from the poorest soil, while the other wither on the richest one, so some people can derive knowledge from the simplest message, while the other won't get any wiser, even if they're listening to King Solomon. 6:14. There is a price to be paid for everything under the sun, a price for belonging, and a price for not belonging. 6:15. One should never look or sound wiser than it is appropriate in one's station in life. Otherwise, instead of attention and respect, one be subjected to resentment and jealousy. For it is not what it said, but who said it, that counts in this world. 6:16. Burning heretics is still the favorite pastime of the crowd. Only now it has to content itself with somewhat more civilized ways of doing it. 6:17. The relentless sophistry of the endless theological speculation aim to prove the unprovable by piling up dubious assertion on the top of equally dubious assumptions until it's next to impossible to find even a grain of the original truth, provided there was any to begin with, underneath this artificial quasi-intellectual mountain of words, may eventually turn the most religiously inclined person into an atheist. 6:18. The simplicity of faith Jesus Christ enjoined on his disciples is best exemplified in the words, "Do for others what you want them to do for you." This is the meaning of the law of Moses and of the teaching of the prophets. Yet thousands of the Christian theologians have written millions of pages to explicate and interpret such a straightforward message. Why is it the simplicity of truth is not satisfactory or sufficient for so many? 6:19. Why are we all engaged, seemingly forever, in the intellectual foreplay instead of going directly to the heart of the matter? The usual answer to this question is that we are afraid to acknowledge the true reality as it is, which is not surprising, for we all know too well what the sinister reality can do to us. But perhaps equally valid explanation would be found by considering the relative abundance of the free time on our hands, especially if one belongs to the so-called chattering classes. For what is one supposed to do is everything is resolved in the first few minutes of discussion. It becomes rather boring after that. So let's pretend that everything is very complicated, and then we can play this game forever, provided, of course, that there is no child among us who does not know that it is only a game, and may begin to shout something about the naked truth. But unlike what has happened in the famous story about Hans Andersen, such a child is usually completely ignored, or if he stubbornly and foolishly persists in his insolent revelation, then of course something has to be done about the child, hasn't it? And something usually gets done. For the play shall not be interrupted. It has to go on, since everyone who is not a child knows that when it stops, the boredom begins. The dreadful state of having nothing to do, nothing to say, nothing to think of. 620. The emperor without clothes hates nature as a child who is saying it loudly. But so does the rest of his subjects, who are also naturally go along with the lie, pretending to believe that the emperor is dressed up splendidly to protect their own lives. For they all feel like little emperors, having also nothing to cover their nakedness, and are afraid that the child, having said the truth about emperor clothes, will turn around and start telling the truth about theirs. 621. In this age of instant this and instant that, even nostalgia, which, both by definition and by tradition, requires some respectable separation in time between the actual happening and melancholy recollection of it, has acquired such an undignified sense of urgency that on January 1st of the new year, the December 31 of the previous one is instantly remembered as if it happened 100 years ago and is already shrouded in the mist of distant past. 622. I concur with nationalists to the extent that culture, language, and other attributes of a national character are very important. But I strongly disagree with them that this superstructure is more essential than the basis, the people themselves and their security, well-being, and happiness. And I am not willing to sacrifice a single human life for the sake of a few different rules of grammar or a few distinct movements of a dance. 623. Why do some poets today, especially of the female persuasion, write so explicitly on those preciously rare occasions when they reveal something personal about their sexual experiences, whether real or imagined, and are so secretive about other aspects of their life, which are presumably as important as the sexual one? Or are they? 624. Telling people literally without interruption and in infinite variety of ways that sex is the greatest good and cure of all ills inevitably leads to the widespread sexual perversions. For as soon as one discovers that his/her sexual activities do not bring the advertised total happiness, he/she, instead of realizing that sex as a cause of happiness has definite limitations, embarks on a search and experimentation to find the right kind of sex, which would presumably deliver the promised bliss. Such search and willingness to try almost anything would result only in a variety of sexual perversions, and in some extreme cases cause people with cruel personalities to commit sexual crimes. This is further aggravated by another message. incessantly drilled in our heads that one is personally responsible for one's success or failure in everything, including by extension sexual satisfaction as well, and that being persistent in getting whatever one is striving for would ultimately bring the desirable result. Yet, while such an attitude has a limited utility in business transaction, in the matter of sexual, it inevitably leads to violence and rape. The majority of conflicts between men and women are caused by the inability to understand and unwillingness to accept the essential differences that separate the sexes, as a seemingly innate aversion to seeking the true similarities that might unite them. 626. Looking back in the human history, it is clear that the many has always been ruled by the few, and the only choice the ruled ever had on those rare occasions when power that had neither collapsed on its own or overthrown due to a fatal weakness was between more or less harsh rulers. Even the modern parliamentary democracy, ostensibly celebrated and recommended as a paragon of the rule by the people for the people, present to the unbiased view just another variation of a choice, albeit on a regular basis, of a new set of few rulers with mostly vain yet ever undying hope that they will be more gentle in exercise of power than the previous ones were. 627. Many relatively simple and reasonably quick solutions to the persistent social problem have been and still are being rejected precisely because of their simplicity and facility. For their speedy implementation might render a lot of people redundant and what they do unnecessary, and consequently create another problem to be solved. God gives a wife to a man to exercise his patience and to test his endurance, and children to discover his limitations and to learn humility. 629. Confront a man with the unavoidable necessity to choose only one option out of many, and his choice will define who he is. 630. Two horses of a different color, size, and shape had the great difficulties to find anything in common until they saw a cow. 631. There are many useful and even beautiful things which could be made out of a piece of iron, but nobody can turn it into a golden brooch. 632. Civilization at its basics is a process of continuous negotiation by intrinsically unique individuals the terms of their peaceful coexistence.